or 8 here on the program. So, following the political developments that took place in the past week, analyst Aubrey Matshiqi over the weekend wrote an article called "The ANC and Corruption: Straightening the Shadow of a Bent Tree." This article talks about a cancer within the organization that is destroying the soul of the nation. Matshiqi asks, what went wrong? Has the ANC lost its soul? Can the ANC self-correct? Can the ANC be fixed? Ironically, in his Monday weekly letter, President Cyril Ramaphosa said, "We have done much to turn our back on that era by disrupting and dismantling the networks that had infiltrated government, state companies, and even our law enforcement agencies to loot public resources." Well, public analyst Aubrey Matshiqi joins us now to discuss this further. So good to have you, Gogo Aubrey. Thank you very much for being our guest.
Good morning, Thomas.
Let's start off here. Let's allow you to answer your question. What went wrong? Has the ANC lost its soul?
Well, I think the first assumption we must not make, Leanne, is to think that corruption becomes part of the life of the ANC and therefore part of a post-apartheid reality only after 1994. Those who were in the ANC will tell you that the scourge of ANC is something that predates the 1994 democratic breakthrough. But what happened, of course, that after 1994, you saw a change in the relationship between the ANC and state power, which meant that access to power to the ANC after 1994 was no longer an end in itself, but became the means towards the achievement of other ends, such as narrow economic ends. So that's one context in which corruption happened. Another is the fact that for too long, over the past 26 years, we had a very weak and uncompetitive electoral and political party system. As a result of which, whatever sins the ANC committed, it would not be punished by voters at the ballot box. And therefore, in part, this insulated the ANC from punishment by voters. But lastly, what we're seeing is the emergence for some time now, the ANC's complex identity and the ANC as a political reality.
I am going to ask you to repeat that last point. We completely lost you, and I think you made a very, very last point. It was that very last one. What did you say? Because we completely lost you.
Well, over the past decade especially, but not exclusively over the past decade, we have seen the ANC, first of all, becoming increasingly ambivalent towards democratic values. But what we have seen also is the emergence of a gap between the mythical dimensions of the ANC's complex identity and the ANC as a political reality through which people, members of the ANC, leaders of the ANC can loot the state.
And this is a problem that really is something that is, making South Africans on a daily basis lose more and more confidence. And I suppose the question that we need to ask you is, and you ask this, again, I'm asking you to answer your own questions. Can the ANC self-correct at this stage? It's almost so far down the line. How does it self-correct, and can it?
Well, Leanne, you can go back as far as the year 2000. Which was the first time the ANC held its National General Council. And you can go back to reports by the Secretary General or political reports by the ANC president since then, and you will see that the ANC has been very good when it comes to diagnosing the problem, not only of corruption, but also of factionalism. And bear in mind that factionalism, to some extent, fuels the corruption. Because in order for one faction to gain advantage over another, in part, members of such a faction have to accumulate as many resources, financially in particular, as possible in order to win over their factional foe. But you will see that the ANC has not been as good when it comes to implementing its resolutions about how to arrest corruption as it has been when it comes to diagnosing the problem. But therefore, one can safely say that the idea of self-corruption is an idea in self-delusion, and therefore it is illusory and is more realistic as a religious concept than it is as a matter of political practice.
Yeah. I mean, we saw the ANC meet over the weekend. What came out of that meeting?
Well, depending on who you believe among your sources, it would seem that predictable, because the ANC has become factionalized. It is even factionalized about how it perceives of corruption and how it perceives of who is responsible for corruption, and therefore even when it comes to how it should arrest corruption. It would seem that the COVID-19 corruption of today became just an additional factor that divides the ANC along factional lines. But what it exposed also is the fact that one of the reasons we have rampant corruption and why corruption is no longer endemic in our country, but has become systemic, that is the dominant culture in the state and the private sector, is because the ANC as a body lacks moral authority and therefore cannot impose its moral code on its leaders and its members. And those leaders in turn themselves lack moral authority and can therefore not impose the moral code of the ANC on members of the ANC and other leaders. And that is why the Integrity Commission, or sometimes I call it the Integrity Omission, is so impotent because what you have is that those who have power cannot be called upon to account, but those who have power, who have integrity, can also not call upon those who are corrupt in the past to account. And therefore, structures such as the Integrity Commission will not work. In fact, the ANC does not need an Integrity Commission. All it must rely on is its disciplinary structures and disciplinary code. And the fact that it does not betrays that it is unable, as I said, to impose its moral code on its membership and leaders, and therefore its disciplinary structures and code have become useless.
I mean, you look at this Integrity Commission that you bring up. I mean, we see weekend reports coming through and talk of David Masondo and the Integrity Commission basically coming in and finding that he should step down. And then the other half of the ANC come in and say, no, they're using the Integrity Commission as a tool and there's no truth in those findings. I mean, again, can we even take the Integrity Committee seriously? If the ANC don't take them seriously, how can we as the public take their findings seriously?
Well, the Integrity Commission is an exercise in misdirection. What the ANC using structures that already existed before it established the Integrity Commission, the ANC could have called upon its members to account for allegations of corruption and could have done something about corruption. But because, as I said, it is not in a position to impose its moral authority on its members and leaders, it needed this exercise in misdirection. In other words, it misdirected failure to the Integrity Commission.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you just got to question that, because then you again look at the infighting and the battles that are going on, saying that, this, David Masondo, that Deputy Finance Minister, is the young blood that's rising to the ranks. He very much may take over as the Finance Minister. But then there's the older generation within the party wanting to hold back the youth and keep on to power and not let it move forward. And, these are things that we have to contend with in and amongst all of the corruption that's going on in the background. And we're going to get to that and talk about that in a short while, particularly in the background of the letter that the president wrote out yesterday. So, I mean, when you're looking at the older generation fighting the younger generation, this is where a real big problem comes in, the old guard protecting its interests.
Well, Leanne, it is said that insanity is hereditary. We inherit it from our children. In the case of the ANC, the older generation, yes, inherits it from its children, but the younger children not only inherit it from the older generation, particularly those who benefited from BEE and other forms of corruption of the leadership of the ANC, but are also trying to emulate that generation. But they do so at a time when BEE resources have dwindled considerably, and therefore all they're left with is to loot the state.
All right, let's look at that looting now, because we saw this letter coming in, and I mean, just after your article over the weekend as well, your opinion piece, and then the president comes out with his letter yesterday, which was not very well accepted by the public, I must say. I mean, when you start getting a trend on social media that is still the number one trending topic, that let me look at it. Zuma was better. Hashtag Zuma was better. That's what's trending at the moment, where the opening line from the letter of our president basically saying corruption during a national disaster is a particular heinous type of crime and perpetrators are going to be dealt with decisively and harshly. It is difficult to understand the utter lack of conscience that leads a business person who heeded the call to provide life-saving supplies during a devastating pandemic to inflate the price of a surgical mask by as much as 900%. Again, it's a president explaining himself as being shocked. He can't believe it. It's devastating that this is happening. But this is all happening under his watch, and it has been happening under his watch for the last, what are we moving into, 10, 11 years now?
Well, part of the problem by the president has gotten away skewing statements of his righteous indignation about corruption is that I think for too long we as South Africans have been soft on the president and have been and the media to some extent has been soft on the president because what emerged, particularly towards now, is the idea that a particular faction, and that was not the faction who supported the president, was a faction of devils. And the faction opposed to the president, therefore, was characterized as the devil, and his supporters were characterized as the angel. And the president himself was characterized as an archangel. And I think what is coming home now to roost are the chickens of us being too soft on him, and him for too long making statements about how he is going to arrest corruption. And to this point, there's very little demonstrable evidence that the president, first of all, has the power to do so. He might have the administrative power, but I think politically, what is being exposed is that he is impotent. But all of this is happening at a very bad time for the president. Because at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, his approval rating was quite high. I think it is much lower now, and the ANC's approval rating is even lower, because this corruption is not only happening during COVID-19, but COVID-19 has exposed the failures of the ANC of the past 26 years. So what we have here is a perfect storm of antipathy towards the ANC, antipathy caused by failure as a state, and antipathy caused by the fact that its members have flirted quite heavily with the nefarious, with the venal, and the corrupt.
I mean, there's another statement that I have to quote from the letter from yesterday, basically saying, as a country, we have done much to turn our back on that era by disrupting and dismantling the networks that have infiltrated government, state companies, and even our law enforcement agencies to loot public resources. Have we really? I mean, what has the NPA actually done? I mean, when you honestly look at the kind of cases that have been brought to book, who is being held accountable for the hundreds of billions of rands that was looted from South Africa under state capture? What exactly is the president actually talking about here?
Well, Leanne, that's precisely the problem. If you check all our states, there is no crime in this country called state capture in our statutes. The term state capture is a political term, is a term that is used in battle between these factions and the ANC. That's not the same as saying state capture does not exist. It does exist. That's not the same as saying corruption does not exist. It does exist. The problem is that the term has become weaponized. It has become a political weapon. Let's call this what it is. It is corruption. And in our statutes, we do have a crime called corruption. And our statutes should be used to go after those against whom allegations of corruption have been made. They must be prosecuted and be found guilty. They must be convicted. We must stop playing these political games and inventing legal concepts that don't exist, such as state capture. But also another thing maybe we must stop doing is to characterize the decade or the 9 years of Jacob Zuma's presidency as 9 wasted years of Jacob Zuma. These were 9 wasted years of an ANC president that on many times was protected, or on many occasions was protected by the ANC in parliament against votes of no confidence. And therefore, these were 9 wasted years of an ANC government and ANC misrule. We must not reduce it to one man.
Yeah. And that's the reality. I mean, while we're sitting on air, we get a message through coming from the ANC, basically calling for tough measures to deal with COVID-19 allegations of corruption. And that's a message sent by the ANC, and they are, talking about cleaning it up, anti-corruption, good governance, all of these things, where it almost seems like desperation in words, not in actions, because that's the problem. I mean, when we're being told that the NPA is doing its job, that the evidence is not there, that they are targeting the right people. When we talk about the Hawks, I mean, what have the Hawks actually gone and done? I mean, besides arresting a former minister's wife on the weekend, that is still questionable. And many people asking, hang on a second, why did the Hawks get involved in something like that? It's the whole issue of Animal Farm. And these are the kind of questions that South Africans are sitting back and looking at and saying, it is just not fair. You talk about the fact that you're shocked, this is a pandemic, this is a desperate time for the country, but who is doing what? It is not up to us. It is up to you as a president and as a ruling party to take action against those people that are in your control.
Well, I think, Leanne, trust between those who govern, but the ANC, or misgovern us, on the one hand, and the citizenry has broken down. So when you hear this outcry, this anger about the levels of corruption in the context of COVID-19, it is not just about corruption that the citizenry is complaining. The citizenry is putting all that it is unhappy about when it comes to the underperformance and failures and weaknesses of the ANC into this one basket, that is the COVID-19 corruption. Now, of course, structures such as the NPA will argue that it takes a long time to work on these cases because some of them are quite complex. And I agree to some extent, but to some extent, I don't agree. We need indictments because not all of these cases are complex. And until such time, that a big fish is charged, prosecuted, and convicted, we will still remain in a situation where there is no disincentive in our political life for politicians to be corrupt.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if we look at something like the SIU and what was done yesterday with the Eskom officials, we had a conversation with the SIU that are now going after 12 defendants that have been named. These, of course, are civil claims right now, still not a criminal investigation, which includes the Guptas, former ministers, former CEOs and GEs at Eskom. And we know who the role players are here. What do you make of that? Is that the right start, even though it's 4 years after the fact and that money's probably gone? What do you make of that? Are we doing the right things? Is this the way we should do it? Or is it a little too late for this?
Well, it's better late than never. But we have been at this point many a time. And as I keep on saying, and the South African keep on saying, we are still to see a key member, a senior member in government, particularly in the ruling party, against whom allegations of nefarious activity have been made, being charged, prosecuted, and ending up in an orange overall. And as I say, unless and until that happens, there is no disincentive for our politicians and for senior government officials who are linked to the ruling party to stop being corrupt.
Yeah. Finally, as we conclude this discussion, I mean, how can a South African voter tolerate this abuse from their own and then continue to bring them back in power? Is this a reflection of the depth of the state of decay in our society, that we are either numb or oblivious to this criminal and immoral behavior because this leadership is simply becoming a sample, unfortunately, of who we are?
Well, unfortunately, and as I said, some of this corruption can be blamed on an uncompetitive party system. On an uncompetitive electoral politics. And our system has been uncompetitive since 1948. Since 1948, we have had the problem of single-party dominance. The ANC continued with that after 94, because since 1994, we've had the single-party dominance of the ANC. With that single-party dominance since 1948, not just since 1994, we have seen high levels of corruption. In some sense, the period between 1948 and 1994 was probably one of the most corrupt periods in South African history. And the ANC is simply adding on that culture of corruption we have had since 1948. But we must be fair to voters. Since 2009, especially those who vote for the ANC, and in the main, those who are back, have been moving away from the ANC in two ways. They have either been prepared to vote for other parties or have decided to stay at home. And if my memory serves me well, last year, 18 million South Africans who are eligible to vote did not vote, which indicates to them that they are of, to me, that they are of two views. That firstly, elections on their own do not deliver change, and that there is a lack of credible alternatives in our political landscape. But when you want change, even within an electoral system that does not deliver fundamental change, sometimes what you must do at first is to pick from that paucity of a credible alternative to the ANC to begin the process of change.
We haven't even spoken about some of the initiatives that obviously the government put into play for the lockdown in South Africa, and still so many people talking to this and the destruction of the economy. Nobody could have predicted what would happen in the country in terms of a pandemic. But, you know, looking at what the alcohol ban is doing to industry, looking what the cigarette ban has been doing, and this is something that is unprecedented around the world. There is no other world that have put particularly the tobacco ban in place, and then the talk of the corruption that's happening behind this. We're only talking about PPE corruption. We don't even know what's happening there. So it's a fundamental lack of trust that unfortunately leads South Africans to question every decision that's taken. And that in itself is difficult as a citizen of a country.
Well, Leanne, when you have such serious breakdown in level of trust between those who govern and those who are governed, because those who govern are guilty of impunity. What you must expect is that you are going to see the ruling party going through a crisis of confidence. You are going to see its president and president of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, going through a crisis of confidence. But if the ANC fails, as I think it will, to arrest this problem, then you are going to see rising levels of impunity amongst ordinary citizens. But you might see something else, a rise in levels of civil unrest because of the excesses of both the political and economic elites in this country.
We leave it there for this morning. It is always a pleasure speaking to you and getting your views on a range of issues. Aubrey Matshiqi is giving, of course, his views and analysis of the ruling party, as well as more insight into his article, The ANC and Corruption, Straightening the Shadow of a Bent Tree. All right, just gone 8. Let's get our news. Sakina standing by.